Hello and good afternoon. My name is Tanya Lay. I am the Director of Specialty, Director of Sales for Specialty. Forgive me, it's been an interesting day. I'd like to welcome you to Goldman Gems. Take another look. It will be broadcasted by Sandra Mohring. First, let's go over a couple housekeeping items here. For the Zoom functionalities, please refrain from using the chat function and put all of your questions in the Q&A section. Feel free to ask your questions during the presentation so that we have those in the queue ready to go at the end of the presentation. I do need to let you know that the meeting is being recorded and has been pre-recorded. However, we will have live Q&A at the end. Next, I need to let you know about some further resources available to you. If you'll check the chat box in the Zoom functionality, you will find the Perimetry Focus Month registration. So you can register for any future events that we're hosting all throughout the month of March. You can also find your visual field e-learning digest, as well as the PDF version. Again, you can find all of those in the chat function. Next, I wanted to introduce Sandra Mohring. So thank you so much for joining us today, Sandra. Sandra is Haag-Streit's perimetry specialist operating from the main office in Cincinnati, Ohio. Since 1996, she has spent her career engulfed in the world of octopus, concentrating on both sales and continuing education. She works with physicians, specialists, and technicians throughout the United States and has lectured for Jacopo on the same subject for over a decade. She also trains our distributor sales force and associates on many features and benefits of Haag-Streit's octopus. Sandra, welcome and thank you so much. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Tanya. I'd like to welcome everyone today to our session on Goldman Gems. It was very, very exciting for us to see the registration numbers reflect so much interest in Goldman kinetic perimetry. We're really, really happy to have everybody here. I was asked earlier who could benefit from this webinar, and I'm just going to say basically I think everybody can. Whether you're a physician that is in general practice in optometry or ophthalmology, or if you're specialized, glaucoma, neuro, retina, plastics, everybody could be using Goldman perimetry. If you're a technician who's using manual Goldman perimetry, or even if you're using Octopus 900 with our Goldman module, you could even be in practice and never even considered using Goldman before. But I truly believe there's a Goldman gem or a pearl of wisdom that everybody can take away from the next hour. I would like to add that last week, as part of our Focus on Perimetry series, Professor Fiona Rowe presented a webinar called How Can I Get the Most Out of Kinetic Perimetry? For those of you who did not have the opportunity to see this presentation, please take time and view the recording. It was probably the most informative that I have ever seen in my career on the subject of Goldman kinetic. And I want to shout out to Professor Rowe again. Thank you so much. It's always wonderful to see Goldman being displayed because I think it's something that we just don't have enough of. So we were very lucky that we had her as one of our speakers for Goldman. So why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm going to go ahead and just tell you that this particular webinar is basically divided into 4 parts. So the first thing that we're going to talk about are the similarities between manual Goldman and then the Octopus 900 module, where the manual Goldman then is continued in semi-automated computerized methodology. We're also going to talk about the enhancements because obviously when you have a computer and you can do a lot more with different features to benefit practice. So we're going to go over not all of them because we only have an hour, unfortunately. There's quite a few. And then next, we're going to go over some case presentations. Now, not a lot of detail on case presentations, but there are some good ones that I want you to be able to see in how Goldman Kinetic can enhance your practice. And then last, we're going to go over some tips on running computerized Goldman. We're going to go on some tips on how to make the best of running that visual field, also getting the most reliable results. All right, so I think everybody will recognize this handsome man. This is Professor Hans Goldman, and he brought us the Goldman perimeter, the 940, that was manufactured by Haag-Streit back in 1945. It's amazing because this guy is still going strong, the perimeter, of course. When it came out and when it debuted, it was the first time that we were able to combine fixation, retinal adaptation, stimulus size and intensity, and that all of those things could be precisely controlled. And then in addition to that, we're plotting out the visual field with the use of the pantograph and allowing for the mapping of the visual fields and all of the defects. This was just, it was truly breaking news in the world of perimetry. And the fact that it happened back in 1945 and that this perimeter is still going strong in the marketplace is pretty remarkable when you think about it. Unfortunately, the Goldman perimeter is no longer manufactured, of course, because what Haag-Streit decided to do is they decided to take what was working in 1945, and with the onset of technology, of course, it became obvious that being able to computerize perimetry would be the next best step. So Octopus developed the first computerized automated perimeter back in 1975 for static perimetry. That was the Octopus 201. And it was just a matter of time before Haag-Streit computerized manual Goldmans to that same place. So in 2007, over 60 years since the Goldman was released, we brought on the Octopus 900 that is inclusive of true Goldman perimetry. Pretty cool. Some of the similarities that we're looking for and that we see between manual Goldman and also for computerized automated is essentially the Haag-Streit Goldman 940 and the Haag-Streit Octopus 900. We're using the exact same intensities, the exact same stimulus sizes. Roman numeral 1, the smallest, Roman numeral 5 is the largest. The Arabic numbers and letters walk hand in hand together down that road of life to get your intensity. So your 1A is the dimmest light, the 4E is the brightest light. And this is true in Goldman as well as in the Octopus Goldman module. The other similarity, imagine, I sometimes think that perimetrists truly had to be somewhat octopus-like in order to run this device, because you're watching the patient's fixation, right? And you're having to move the light with the pantograph. So that light has to come into the patient's visual field. We always go from not seeing to seeing area. When you're flipping over to view the opposite side and to test the opposite side, most patients probably had a clue that the light was going to be coming from the other side of the plane, because that wasn't an easy thing. It wasn't quiet. It was very noisy to move from one side to the other. But nonetheless, it worked for what it did at the time. And we're plotting everything on that Goldman chart, that paper. So not only are you drawing that light, you're looking at when the patient responds, and then you're marking that patient response on the Goldman chart. Again, we're doing the same thing with the Octopus 900 and with having everything computerized. The difference is we're using a mouse to draw those vectors. And with our vector set, one click, just one click with the mouse, and the light is going to travel from wherever you clicked all the way to the center area. If you want to drag and drop, you can also start, hold your mouse key down, and then just release it when you want the vector line to end. You can shoot straight line vectors from inside the optic nerve out. And obviously when you're mapping out any scotomas, the same situation. For For RP patients, when you're looking for those islands of vision, we map out those islands of vision the opposite way. So we're dragging that vector into the patient's field of view from that island or that sea of darkness, unfortunately, that they exist in. So this is still the same idea as what we were doing with the manual Goldman, just much, much easier, and things are more controlled. The other thing that we see is obviously patient's focus. So we no longer have to be looking through this tube to see if our patient is fixated while we're also running this light. It's impossible. You can't do it very easily there, but with the computer you can, because this eye window is displayed all the time. So you're constantly watching as the vectors are running automatically, as we love to say. You'll notice that in the top right-hand corner of this image, now this is a little bit dim. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this very well, but there is a circle there. That circle is indicative of the patient responding with the patient response button. This is something that Octopus does for not only static perimetry, but also for kinetic perimetry. And static perimetry, whenever a stimulus is presented, there's an asterisk that flashes directly above as well. But for kinetic, you see that patient responding, you know that they have pushed, and then obviously you're going to see the patient response in the form of whatever symbol is being used for that particular vector set. And you can see those responses throughout. And then of course we have drawing the vectors. We have choices. We have a straight line vector. We have reaction time vectors, which is new and enhanced benefit. Static points is that single dot. We then also have the additional 2 vector sets here. One of them is a guided vector, which is really nice if you want to test outside that area to see if your patient truly is not responding. I typically love to draw within that 15-degree radius here, just like a question mark shape, because you can travel very quickly outside that eyesopter to make sure that the patient truly is not seeing anything. A lot of physicians put in static points out here as well. You can do that. We've got that static point availability. And then you also have the free vector. So your free vector is the vector that you used all the time with your manual Goldman, where you would turn that light on in the bowl, and then you could move it anywhere you needed to move it. Curvy line, doesn't matter, whatever you need to do. So we have all of those set in the 900 Goldman or computerized. So very, very similar, just doing things in a different place, computerized screens. And there's another look at your full field of view when you are running the Octopus 900 Goldman module. Yeah. So let's talk about some of the enhancements for added benefit. Your speed is controlled. So controlled speed, the velocity is pre-select and it's constant. I can't think of anything more difficult than having a technician move that light bar at a certain speed that's basically holding the same speed throughout the whole movement. It's very, very difficult, almost impossible to do. Whereas the velocity here with the Octopus 900, because it is computerized, it is then controlled. So your responses become more reproducible, and they're also independent of the operator. They're independent of the operator's speed, and they're independent of the operator's expectations for those return patients. So it doesn't matter, your speed can be set. We typically would recommend 5 degrees per second for anything at 90 degrees. When you come into the 60-degree realm, for instance, for superior ptosis testing, maybe take it to 4 degrees per second. And then anything within central 30 degrees, 3 degrees per second. The optic nerve, mapping out that disc, 2 degrees per second. And this is one of the rubs in Goldman Kinetic. There's no standardization. So I'm hoping that that comes soon. But the good news is we give you the options of all of these items so that you can choose what's best for your particular patient, pathology, practice, etc. Another thing that's an enhancement is a normative ring. So we have an outline of where that patient's visual field should fall based on if they're using a 5-4E, which you see depicted on the left-hand side of your screen, or if they're all the way down to a 1-1A, the very smallest, dimmest light that we have. These guides are really great, these normative rings, just to guide that technician who maybe is not so familiar with the Goldman. It gives you an idea. I always teach that, you know, your inner ring is like an A- student and your dark ring is an A student and the one at the top is the A+ student. But basically this gives them an idea of where that visual field should fall so that when they are marking and repeating needed vectors that don't quite fit the bill, they know where to look and they have that as a guideline. So that normative ring is really a good training tool and a good tool for your technicians. The next thing was just recently added, and this is actually kind of a funny story because when the Goldman was being developed, we had this function and then it went away and they just brought it back again. And it's one that kind of gives me goosebumps, I have to admit. You can now underlay a static examination. So for me, this is exciting because I think about the very first 900 that was placed in the United States. I'm old enough to remember that, and that was to a retina specialist out in California. And this retina specialist, like many neuro-ophthalmologists and neurospecialists, they always ran a central 30-degree static test. So retina specialists sometimes were back down to 10 degrees for RP patients, but they would run that static examination and then follow with a kinetic examination to go outside that area. This is such a cool benefit to Goldman because what you're able to do is you can just click on one button and you can choose what underlay you want. So if you want to bring in the patient's 10-degree field or 30-degree static field, then you can underlay it, and they even give you choices as to what you can underlay with. This particular one is the grayscale of comparison, but they also have grayscale values. They have, you can bring in the comparison numbers. You can bring in your probability plots. And this is so helpful because you're now able to say, okay, where do I need to plot those kinetic vectors that will best give me the story that I need for how my patient's visual field is doing in the periphery. So it's quite exciting that they've added that in. Next, we have reaction time vectors. And reaction time vectors are also a very important thing because what we're doing here is we're measuring how quickly a patient can see a response. And then we're correcting based on any patient that might have a delay in compensating that visual field. So essentially a reaction time vector always has to be placed where sensitivity is at its peak. So wherever your patient has good vision, we want to go ahead and place those reaction time vectors there. Typically it's in central 30 degrees. So where that sensitivity is highest. The reaction time vectors then, usually you run about 3 or maybe 4 in that area. And as soon as the patient responds, we can then take that millisecond, it's rated in milliseconds, and we can mark the corresponding visual field isopters based on that patient's response time. So the delay in the response is then compensated. So here there's several different examples in reaction time vector outcomes. And you've got 2 different optic nerves mapped out. And you can see that the blind spot measurement is in 2 eyes and the red isopter is not corrected while the green isopter is corrected. It makes a huge, huge difference in your visual field outcomes. Another example is here a 55-year-old female without compensation, and then again with compensation. And this was a really, really large delay in reaction time. She was at 2,300 milliseconds, which is quite large. Another example of it that I think might show you very well the difference in how it can add to your isopter readings is this particular example. If you look at the quantifications of your optic nerve and of your inner isopter and your outer isopter, without compensation and then with compensation, there's quite a degree of difference there. So reaction time vectors, they actually test the real function of the eye and not just the reaction of the patient. They're more reliable results also for those who have any type of physical impairments that slow down their reaction time. Next, we talk about the automatic isopter draw, which I like to call the automagic, based on a colleague of mine. He framed that phrase for octopus because so much of what we do is automagic. The isopter draw, that's right. You have to put away your colored pencils and your colored markers because you don't get to draw on your Goldman paper anymore. We're actually doing that for you. And for your excluding scotomas or your blind spots, your isopters are now drawn automatically, and then your colors can be customized. So this is a sample patient of a retinoschisis patient that was done with 4 isopters and a measurement of blind spot. To automatically draw those isopters, you would simply move your mouse to a point of the patient's response and then simply double right click and the isopter draw automatically connects. It's such a time saver. I mean, it goes back to saving time. That's a huge time saver. I know it's not so fun because you don't get to color anymore, but you know what? We can find and save that time to do something more fun, right? The other thing that kind of gets me excited, and I still have to admit to getting a few goosebumps over this, is the measurement of isopters. Imagine what it's like in manual Goldman world when you map out an isopter and you have to eyeball change from visit to visit to visit to visit. What we can do now with the Goldman on the Octopus 900 is simply to automatically measure it. And it truly is that simple. You lay your mouse again on the isopter line, you right click to reveal, and there is a measurement. You just click on the measurement and voila, you now have your isopter measurements. This is the first time that Goldman kinetic fields have been quantified. It's crazy neat because in the past, again, we were just eyeballing. So imagine seeing if that optic nerve is enlarged. You can look at it and say, yeah, okay, it's coming into so many degrees, but when you actually have a quantification, it is a true measurement of inside that area, how large that area is. And then when you're looking at that patient from visit to visit, that information is very, very easy to compare once it's quantified. Yeah, I still get excited about that. I think that's a wonderful tool also to have. The next thing that's going to save a lot of time because we're computerized is adding a template. Look, Goldman fields can get really, really complex. The fact that we can add a template and that we can create a template, Professor Rowe talked about this in her lecture, that there are certain templates that you're going to run on every single patient based on a suspected pathology or a known pathology for that matter. And having a technician build these every single time a patient comes in and draw them manually versus drawing them manually once and then just pushing the start key because you're going to run the exact same template every single time your patient comes in. It's huge. Templates comply with the needs of the clinic. You build what you need. We don't dictate to you what to do. You build what you need. It saves time. It then provides consistency from visit to visit. Yes, we want repeatability in our visual fields. It's very, very easy to use. Even, I mean, if you've never been trained in Goldman perimetry and you have a template, It makes it so much more simple to run that visual field. And then you can use this as a baseline and add different combinations. Please remember that templates can be just a starting point. So if you have a patient that has defects coming down both of these vectors and you want to add another vector to the input or the output right here at these radial degrees, you can do that. You're not locked into just doing what's on the screen. You can add to that. Now, obviously, I'm talking about the Octopus 900, the Pro that's fully loaded with everything Goldman. For a 900 basic, you have the capability of running one vector set, and I'll talk about that here in an upcoming slide. But for right now, we're basically talking about the Octopus 900 Pro having full Goldman. If you do have a 900 basic and you want to do full Goldman kinetic, you can simply upgrade to that particular software. It's not a hardware change. It's merely adding a code, and you just purchase that, add that code in, and then you can do full Goldman kinetic perimetry, even if you just have a 900 basic. So adding templates, really, really important. This is from my simulator. So I've got my 5-4, my 3-4, my 1-4, my blind spot, my vertical vector for Ptosis. I will say I'm only 8 vectors because we're doing demonstrations and we're doing trainings constantly. So time is key there, which is why there are only 8 vector sets. Most practices will go ahead and they will go and shoot vectors on every 15-degree radius, and then they straddle the vertical and the horizontal lines. So in that case, you're looking at 28 vectors being run for one isopter set. Whatever your needs are for your practice, you do what you do. You do what's best for you. So you've got the flexibility of doing that. All right. So 25 minutes in and we're at case presentations. So we've got a couple here. Again, I wanted to go over some of the things that set Octopus apart with that 900, and we weren't able to touch on everything because of time. So we're going to jump into the case presentations now. And the first case presentation I want to bring up is the kinetic static Ptosis test. So there's always this thing of, should I run static or should I run kinetic for my Ptosis patients? This is probably the question that we get all the time. And the answer for me is very simple, because static testing outside 30 degrees is not only difficult, but it's very inaccurate. Kinetic perimetry is much, much easier for a patient. It's not only easier, but it's quicker and it's more reliable. So think about it for just a minute. The whole reason why kinetic perimetry is around is to measure outside that 30 degree. 30 degree is great for static perimetry because typically your sensitivity is high. And as you go outside 30 degrees, you require more to see, essentially. Kinetic movement of a light target is much, much easier than a flash of light in your periphery, but it's also true for patients that have severe loss of sensitivity. So the more severe the disease, the easier it is to see kinetic perimetry over static. But when we look at Ptosis patients, we're looking at a couple of things. We're looking at time, we're looking at evaluations, we're looking at reliability. When we perform a Ptosis test statically, this is a taped lid. And you probably can't see, or maybe you can, but it's 3 minutes and 3 seconds for that taped lid. This is the pattern that is in the Octopus library. So if you have a 900 basic, for instance, this is the pattern that you're going to see for your Ptosis. This is what is in our library. If you have a 900 Pro, this is also in your library, but 900 Pros have the capability of building their own static test, whatever you want. So if you want to reduce this, if you want to drop these all the way down to the horizontal, If you want to make these 10 degrees apart, whatever you do, you can do whatever you want on the 900 Pro. But again, 3 minutes and 3 seconds for this particular taped lid. And when we look at the untaped lid, we're at 4 minutes and 11 seconds. So statically for this example, we're looking at just over 7 minutes. We're on 2 separate pages, right? We've got 2 separate printouts, right eye. And if you notice, you talk about the inconsistency of this information. When you look at the results, you can see that the patient didn't see, and then all of a sudden they saw and they saw, and then they didn't see, and then they saw and they saw. We see this a lot when you're testing anything in static perimetry that goes outside that 30-degree range, because it's really difficult to see those flashes of light. You're going to miss quite a few of them. So most people don't have holes in their eyelids. I said most, not all. But essentially, this is something that you wouldn't really see for Ptosis testing. Let's look now at what you can get from the kinetic testing. First of all, your time is going to be basically cut in half. I mean, that's a no-brainer. It is much, much easier to drop these from 60 degrees with a moving light. The patient's then going to push the button whenever they notice that light is coming into their field of view. Your untaped lid is down at the bottom. Your taped lid is up at the top. I will tell you that I ran this field on myself with a taped lid down. So I kind of did it opposite so that we could get a good feeling for the separation of the two. Normally, obviously, you wouldn't have these jagged up and down lines. So this should have been smoothed out by repeating a vector. So I apologize if that isn't as smooth as it should be. But essentially, we did this in half the time. That's number one. And number two, you've got your taped and your untaped results on the same plane of existence. So you're not looking at 2 different pieces of paper. And then also, you have the capability with the octopus to turn on a coordinates feature. And that coordinate feature essentially will allow you to hover over the untaped lid, and it gives you a Cartesian plot. So it's going to tell you at exactly what degree that patient saw the untaped lid. And then you can follow that up to the taped lid, and it gives you another degree. You just subtract the 2, and that is what's going to be gained through surgery for that patient. So it's very, very easy. If you don't want to go to the trouble of using the coordinates, again, it's a tool that's very helpful for some. Others don't want to use it because they're just going to eyeball the difference on that Goldman paper, knowing that those are 10-degree differences here. And they're just going to say, hey, my patient has X degree of change. Right? So you can tell faster, more accurate, it's more reliable, it's repeatable. Most use a vertical vector with the 900 Pro. They'll build those vertical vector templates and then just run those on every patient. Again, we repeat vectors that don't make sense as far as the patient answers. You just right-click on a vector to repeat it. And you can get some pretty good results in a very, very short amount of time. Another case presentation, Retinoschisis patient. This is actually a retired employee of ours. Good friend Peggy gave us permission to use her field, and she's quite excited that we're doing that. I won't give you the whole story because we don't have enough time, but essentially, Peggy noticed that when she was backing out her new SUV, and Peggy's just a little sprite of a thing, she's a very tiny girl, that she was almost sideswiping people and running into people because she couldn't see them coming when she was in parking lots and backing out. So she went to a general ophthalmologist, and he told her that she had retinoschisis and it was not going to get any worse, and not to worry, it happens sometimes. He did not run a visual field on her. And then he sent her to a retina specialist, and he did not run a visual field on her. And Peggy was just as upset when she came back from that visit as she was at the very beginning of all of this. So she asked us to run a visual field. Nobody's a doctor. We don't claim to be a physician. We don't know. We're just running and seeing what comes up. And this is what happened. So we ran a 30-degree static visual field. Her actual values, we noticed on the rim here, 27s, 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 26s, 25s, 25s, 28s, and then boom, we have 22s, 23s, 24s, and a big old 13 sitting on her rim. If we had I ran a G program on her for this. I wish I would have run a 32 or a 30-2 just to get that even disbursement. But honestly, I don't even know if it would have been picked up. Our G program, because this is sitting right on the rim, it just happened to be luck got it right there because of where we test with our G, our glaucoma or general program. So her value was a 13 decibel. And when we compared it to an age-matched normal, she was 11 decibels off. Everything else that you see here is a plus, which means that she was within normal limits on every other location, but she has this huge 11 decibel loss sitting on her 30-degree rim. So again, what are we going to do next? If you see a patient like this, you need kinetic perimetry, because we ran a Goldman kinetic on the Octopus 900 and boom, that's what she's lost. And do you know what? That point that she missed was sitting right here. And the thing that frustrates me a little bit about this case presentation was that she was so upset for so long, and she still, after going to 2 physicians, she still didn't understand why she was having these issues. But after we ran this visual field, and I told her very simply, this is the area that you're not seeing anything in, she's like, oh, sometimes what it takes is to show a patient, this is your function. This is why you're having problems. And that's why Goldman Kinetic is so impressive for so many case presentations. You have to be able to show them, this is why it's happening. This is what you're missing right here. And look, for a 5-4-3-4-1-4 isopter, we ran 3 isopters on her. We measured her optic nerve, 8 minutes and 1 second. If you add that to the time that we ran her 30-degree field, we were in for just a tad over 10 minutes per eye. That's some good outcomes for that type of a time investment. Very impressive what Goldman can do. The next case presentation, unfortunately, it's probably the sadder one, RP patients. So with our RP patients, we have that island of vision, or islands of vision in this case, that are stacked in that sea of darkness. So most RP patients, this patient had just tunnel vision, 10 degrees. Some patients you see even less than that, obviously. And the job of the technician, the perimetrist, the orthoptist, is to go in and to identify where it is these islands of vision are occurring. Remember, with kinetic perimetry, we're always going from not seeing into the seeing view, right? So to identify these fields and to find these in that sea of darkness can be very, very, very time consuming, true. Probably the worst case is RP with regards to time and mapping out these fields. A lot of practices, when they are mapping out these islands of vision, they will go ahead and just put static points. You can see static points here on the right eye, these little static points on the sides. They'll just stack static points everywhere, trying to find out where is that island of vision. With the Octopus 900, because we do have that free vector, we always use that free vector for situations like this, because you can very quickly move that light and just let the patient know, look, you're going to see this at some point. So I want you to just click the button when you see that light come into your field of view. And even with your patient fixated with that tunnel vision, that sensitivity is very, 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 very down to what, 10 degrees, 4 degrees. They're still going to be able to see that light traveling out here. So you're going to be able to identify that island. And by moving a free vector, you can slowly move it into an area. Once the patient says, hey, I saw something, I think, you can come back and bring that light in slower. They push when they see, and then you can start mapping out that vector by drawing straight line vectors from outside that patient's field of view to inside that area, and then successfully map out these islands of vision. Look, everybody knows these are very, very hard cases, and they are difficult for both patient and sometimes for technicians and perimetrists to do this. But it's so gratifying for a patient to be able to see something. It's so important. I remember seeing an RP patient being tested, and the doctor was running static points of a 90-degree field waiting for them to see something. I've seen other RP patients where even though they know that they have a constricted field, they're running 30-degree fields as their static presentation. It's like, why do that to somebody when you know you can't see? You want to be able to give them as much of a pat on the back as possible. And this is a beautiful way to do it with kinetic perimetry. So our last case presentation, I wanted to talk to the 900 basic users who are getting that one Goldman kinetic test. With the new version of I-96, this is the test that you would be getting. This is your template for that one Goldman test. It used to be that we would be able to build whatever test you wanted as your one Goldman. We can't do that anymore with the new software. There are some doctors who want that just to be a vertical vector. There's some that want it to be a Social Security Administration disability test, or a VA disability test, or a state disability test. So your one isopter that is included on the 900 basic, it's kind of nice because you can use it for various and sundry different things. Switzerland has incorporated reaction time vectors, which are those double tipped arrows that we talked about earlier. And look, it's great, they're there, okay, but you don't know if your patient can actually see in that area. So having pre-programmed reaction time vectors doesn't always work. However, if your patient has sensitivity, like you can use these. You can also use this as a disability test because that's what it is and that's what it was created for. You may or may not be able to use it for a driver's license testing, but I know some states that will approve that for driver's license testing as well. And then for Ptosis testing, you may be able to just turn on your eraser and erase those inferior vector points. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 will give you 8 on the superior side, and you can go ahead and use this as your Ptosis as well. Again, if you're a 900 basic user, you have one Goldman kinetic test, you can always upgrade to get full Goldman capabilities should you wish. So I hope that portion of the webinar here has been helpful. We're going into the last portion, which are the Goldman gems for running visual fields. And guess what? This is the funny thing that everybody kind of pulls their hair out. There are no standards in Goldman kinetic perimetry. Everybody does it different. I've been doing this now for almost 30 years, and I've talked to doctors throughout the United States, clinics, technicians, perimetrists. Everybody says the same thing. Even when you go to a government facility and you go to another government facility in another state, they do it a different way. It's okay. We've created capabilities so that you can, again, do whatever it is that you need to do. So one of the things that we always hear is do you start with a 5-4 or do you start with a 1-4? Do you start with the biggest, brightest light or do you start with the smallest, brightest light? And I got to tell you, I hear it both ways. So the idea is to start with the smallest light to get the hardest part of the visual field mapping out of the way for the patient so that fatigue doesn't set in. However, what I found personally is that most clinics that are doing that are also running a 1-4E, the blind spot mapping, going directly into a 3-4E and going directly into a 5-4E without any break hardly at all. That's tough for any patient to sit through. We've always taught to start with a 5-4E and get the big bright in first so that the patient, A, gets that pat on the back because most of them are going to be able to see that. And it also allows you to see if the field is constricted immediately. So again, you can do it either way. Fixation targets, again, something else that everybody does differently. Some people just use the central point for kinetic. We feel that using the cross mark is easier because of Troxler effect, because asking a patient to stare at a central point for more than 15 seconds can be a little bit difficult. Even though they're looking for a moving light that's going to come into their field of view, staring at that central point, a lot of patients won't blink because they're afraid they're going to miss something. So again, we offer a central point, we offer the open cross mark, and we offer a 5-degree ring. Choose whatever you want to do. If you decide to build an isopter set or a vector set or a test using 3 or more or 2 or more vector sets, what's lovely is that you can pause after each group. So the Octopus allows you to have this button that says pause after group, which means you run your 1-4E, then you pause, then you can run your 3-4E, and then it will pause, and then you can start running your 5-4E, or and vice versa, however you decide to do it. So it's always going to pause with each vector set that's run, so that when the next set starts, you can let the patient know these lights are going to be a little bit smaller, whatever you need to do based on your needs in your clinic. Remember too that when you create a template, it's easy to draw in clockwise order. Once your template is drawn and you bring it into the system, you randomize within that group, which means when you hit the start key, these vector presentations will be presented in randomized order, even if you built them in clockwise order, which is also very good. So if we build our 5-4E base, the next step then is repeats. When do you repeat a vector? You repeat a vector 3 different ways. And the way we train here is we always repeat the first vector, even if it's a new vector set. So if I do a 5-4E, I'm going to repeat that very first vector wherever that vector appears first, because we want to make sure the patient understands what it is we're asking them to do. So the first vector should be repeated. We train also that when you load your next vector set, the 3-4E, that you repeat that first one. When you load the next vector set of the 1-4E, also repeat that. And obviously in the optic nerve, when you're mapping out that blind spot, definitely repeat. Because patients are used to seeing everything in the periphery and suddenly it's in central. And even if you tell them that, again, inform, and educate your patient on what you're doing. When you tell them that, they still don't know quite what to look for. So it's usually that first vector in the optic nerve is usually delayed quite a bit, which is why it's important to repeat it. So once we repeat the first vector, what else do we repeat? We repeat any vector that doesn't make sense, right? If you've got these wonderful normal isopters and you have a patient that is not looking like they're normal at all, then you want to repeat anything that's in question. It doesn't take that long. And again, to repeat a vector, you simply lay your mouse on the vector line and you right click. Everything in kinetic on the Goldman in the 900 is a left click, except you right click to repeat and you right click to reveal. But nevertheless, right click to repeat is going to start that light again on the same path. We train to leave those responses on the vector line so that you're looking for short-term and long-term fluctuation. So when we start at the very top here, forgive me, I need to look at another screen to see my mouse, but when we're starting at the 90-degree radius, we see that these 2 points were represented, and actually this was the first point that was presented to the patient. So they needed a little time to say, okay, now I know what I'm doing. Over here, you have 2 that are not sitting directly on top of each other, but are very, very close. We would probably get rid of these 2 here. Again, These two are very close. This one, not so much. Repeated right here. And then these are the little problem children. For this, I would either just go ahead and repeat it yet again, but at some point you have to draw a line in the sand and say, okay, enough is enough. And by the way, I should qualify this particular sample is a simulator and not a real patient, because this probably wouldn't happen in the real world. But sometimes it does, where you get three answers and they're just a wee bit apart, but so much to the point that, yeah, you probably should repeat this yet again. If you've repeated and you have three and you're in a time constraint, just go ahead, and I would recommend taking the median, taking the one in the center. Again, they're probably not going to be that far apart in real life. We always train to start at high noon and go around the clock, because obviously that is the best case scenario for repeats. However, that's after the patient has responded to everything and your isopter is completed, your vector set is completed. You hit the pause key and then you can go in and right click and repeat whatever you want. As you become more comfortable with using the mouse, you're going to find that you're going to be able to watch your patient's fixation and also watch what the patient is responding to. Every vector, once they start, is going to flash on and off. So once your patient responds, if you know that's a repeated vector, you can quickly go over and just right click and repeat it right there in live time. That's truly how it's done. But after training, after you're comfortable, because before then you're going to want to pause at the end of each vector set and then just go in and repeat all the way around the clock. The next step is the best step for the patient, because this is what we love. We're going to let the patient sit back and relax, take a breather, because what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to remove any duplicates so that only one answer is left on each vector line. And we're going to automagically draw our isopter. So now you can very, very clearly see the isopter border, which is another benefit to computerized Goldmans. For the sake of time, we went ahead and I just drew in the 5-4E and the 1-4E. So once your 5-4E is completed, the isopter is drawn, we're going to bring the patient back into the instrument after we load the next template. And in this case, because of time constraints, I just went ahead and did a 1-4E. Once you select that template to add and you bring that 1-4E in, you now have two vector sets. The button that's going to be your best friend whenever you have two vector sets is the button right here where it says show vectors. We don't want to look at everything. We already did our 5-4E. We're done with that. Let's move on. So our isopter for the 5-4E is drawn. We want to concentrate now just on the vector that we're working on, that vector set. So you're going to change your button to show just similar vectors. And now we can just look at that 3-4E, or in this case, the 1-4E. We run that second vector set of the 1-4E. We go ahead, starting at high noon, we repeat the very first vector and we go around the hands of the clock. And then we go ahead and remove any points, let the patient sit back and take another breather. We go in and edit and remove any points, and then we draw our isopter, and oopsie, what happened? Well, it was late in the day and I was rushed and we're backlogged a little bit. And I forgot to move this point, and I forgot to move this point right here. And oh my goodness, what's happening over here? I've got a 1-4E sitting outside of 5-4. That is not possible, right? Not likely that's ever going to happen. So when you have a patient that responded and you forgot to erase a point, it's so easy. You just hit your erase button, you remove that point, you remove the point in question that needs to be removed, and you're fine. There's no worry about that. It's very easy to correct if you forgot to do it. This is kind of easy to correct as well. So the question you have to ask yourself is, was my 3-4E wrong, or was my 5-4E wrong, or was my 1-4E wrong? When you right click and repeat this, you can do so. And if the patient is giving you a consistent answer there, then okay, that was my 1,4E, that was a mistake, and you can correct it on the fly. If it was the 5,4E, all you have to do, remember we're showing similar vectors only, you just go to your vector legend and you click on your 5,4 and you say, let's show that 5,4E one more time. Patient back in the bowl, and you just are going to repeat these. So you can click on your 5,4 and then basically straddle back and forth between your 5 and your 1 and just keep presenting them until you get that consistent answer that you need. It's so easy to do this, and it's so easy to see it because, again, your isopter is drawn. So little tip that will save you a lot of time. Straight line vectors are what we're looking at here. Again, you have the capability of splining or rounding out your vectors. And if you prefer to do that, pardon me, if you prefer to do that, just remember the fewer vectors you run, the more rounded your isopter is going to be. So again, most patients, most clinics, most technicians are doing every 15 degrees, so 28 vectors with a straddling of the vertical and the horizontal. You can add more, you can do less, doesn't matter. You can have them, again, splined, or you can have them straight edge, whatever you want to do. Remember I told you that in Octopus 900 Goldman, everything is a left click of the mouse, except when we are repeating. When we are drawing our automatic isopters, it's a double right click as well. And then when we reveal, you can lay your mouse on that isopter line and right click to get your measurements, which are showing here in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Optic nerve measurements, which I didn't do because of time, can go at the very top of your screen. Important is to put those consistently in the same place each and every time. I wish we had 4 hours to talk about Goldman, but unfortunately, this is about all the time we have. So I want to thank everyone so much for attending. We look forward to any questions after the fact, anything that you want to talk about. We're happy we're here. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this back over to Tanya for question and answer session. So thank you again, everyone. And back to you, Tanya. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sandra. What a great presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me get this to our Q&A slide here. So we're going to go ahead and open it up to questions. So we do have a question in the queue already. I'm hoping, Sandra, that perhaps you know at what point this question came through.
I saw that, yeah. I believe this question, yeah, I think it came through when we were talking about the measurement of the optic nerve.
Okay, so the question is, do you mean you're overlaying from year to year?
I believe that question was referring to the measurement capability of the isopters and any scotomas and or the optic nerve itself. The measurement, the reason why it's so nice to have it is because you're not overlaying basically like you would with static perimetry and seeing those results trended out over time, but you're able to look at them on the iSuite software, and you're able to look and see if that that measurement, that quantification grew or decreased even. So you're looking from visit to visit to visit at different visits in the system itself. I think that's when that question came up.
Okay, and just as a reminder for all of our participants, thanks again for joining us today. Please be sure to enter any questions you may have into the Q&A section. Keep those coming. We're happy to answer those questions. There is another question here, Sandra, just asking about whether or not Humphrey data can be imported into an octopus should someone choose to make the switch. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. We've been able to do that for quite a number of years. So if you have a Humphrey and the hard drive is operational, that's where your data is sitting, We provide not only the instructions, but also the items that you would need to import. It's a one-time importation of that data. We obviously can't guarantee that every single field is going to come over. But the beauty of that is that then you can continue using with Octopus, if you're using a 30-2, 24-2, or a 10-2 pattern, that information then can be brought over into iSuite. You can continue either with our Octopus 900 or with the 600, and you can look at that data over time. So there's really no hiccup at all on bringing over that data and looking at that data over time. Yeah, we've been doing that for a number of years.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for answering that question, Sandra. I don't see any more questions in here at the moment. So again, I encourage you all
Tanya,
to get questions in.
I received a text question. I'm not sure why, but I did receive a text question from an optometrist who was writing in asking how they can use kinetic perimetry because they have a 900 basic. And I wanted to address that one more time, because one of the things that we talked about with this lecture was expanding your patient population. So the fact that with the 900, you would be able to then incorporate some Ptosis testing, that does require Ptosis testing in most states. I want to stress this, is that it does require having a bowl perimeter because you have to test outside 30 degrees. Our Octopus 600 will not perform kinetic perimetry. Only the Octopus 900 does that. But I want to bring up I talked about the very first perimeter, the 900 that was placed in the United States, was going to a retina specialist out in California. But the second unit went to an optometrist. He purchased this unit and he purchased a 900 Pro. And to be quite frank with you, I tried to talk him out of it because he had been doing Humphrey testing and only running 30-degree testing on his Humphrey, and he moved over to the Octopus. He finally settled me down a bit, and he said, I appreciate you wanting to save me money, but in fact, the reason why I want this 900 Pro is because I know my neuro guy, I know my retina specialist, I know my glaucoma specialist, and I know my plastic stock. And he was in a very isolated portion of his state. So all of the specialty doctors was sending their visual fields to him to run. And that's why he got the Octopus 900 Pro, because nobody else in those specialties in that area had the capability to do that. So I thought that was, we're looking at something back in 2007 that happened, and it still holds true today. We have a lot of optometrists who buy an Octopus 900 because they know that expanding that patient population down the road is very important. So I wanted to bring that up. And then also, of course, I also need to stress the disability testing. There are patients who are just desperate to get treatments and that are backlogged. So we have VAs that are backlogged, and the VA actually has reached out to a third party here in the United States called QTC, and they're looking for 900 users who have Goldman capability to run these patients through. So not only can you expand your patient population, but quite frankly, more important, you're helping someone, which makes it even better. So that's something that I just wanted to bring up as well before we close out.
So one more question here, Sandra. The question is, can one reliably test RP with the 900 basic, or is the Pro recommended?
You have to go Pro. You have to go Pro because you have to be able to do more than just one isopter. And you have to be able to test specific areas and move to where you can find those islands of vision. Now, what it will give you, obviously, is the capability of running a static test to find out the tunnel vision there and map that out statically. And you can do that with our top strategy, which is going to perform the threshold in less than 3 minutes per eye. And then with the Pro, you can underlay that static result and then move forward from there. But you definitely need to go with the Pro. Again, if you already have a 900 basic, it's one step. I mean, you would make the investment into the Goldman module, but you wouldn't, it would be less expensive than buying a brand new 900 Pro. We pride ourselves on the fact that we really don't, how do I say this? We don't nickel and dime our customers to death. Everything is very, very straight and upfront. So if we have a module that you want to upgrade to, we're not going to say, hey, you have to buy a brand new perimeter to get that. We're going to go ahead and allow for that upgrade to happen. So that's what we would recommend for RP, most definitely. That's a tough one.
Thank you for that explanation, Sandra. Any other questions at the moment? It doesn't look like there's anything else in the queue here to be answered. Just going to copy this email address here quickly for a private discussion afterwards. Since there's nothing else, Sandra, I thank you for your time very much. Wonderful presentation as always. Thank you so much to all the participants. We really appreciate you continuing to come back, continuing to register for these events. It's a lot of really helpful knowledge. If you have any further questions or concerns or comments, please copy the links in the chat box for contacting Haag-Streit, registering for those perimetry focus month programs that we're doing, as well as downloading the e-learning module for the visual field digest and the PDF. Sandra, any final words from you?
I love octopus. I'm sorry, no. I was watching that recording back and I went, I just referred to a vector as an isopter. That's how much I was vibrating during that recording. So yeah, I get excited, maybe a little too much. But no, thank you, Tanya. Appreciate you.
My pleasure. I thank you all and hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.